Hello everybody and welcome back to War Thunder Mobile. Today we're going to be ranking the rank 8 platoons, specifically the researchable ones, because there's a few of the not researchable ones that I need to get to, and then hopefully we'll be able to do them all in one video. So first, the M60A1 AOS. This thing does have a decent APDS round, however this is not the best because this is the first rank where, a bunch of tanks have AP FSDS and you're still left with an APDS round. So that's not going to give you a lot of an advantage. Your armor is not going to save you from a whole lot in that regard, considering that most of the rounds from other people will be able to pen. And of course, the crew compartment is pretty cramped here, so a shot from the front could easily hit either ammo racks on the sides, or your driver, or potentially just go through your gunner and your commander at the same time. And definitely there's a larger chance if they shoot to the right side that they could hit this ammunition rack. So doesn't exactly have great armor considering what you're going to be going up against, but in a down tier you have a chance at surviving if they're still using AP rounds. But it's not a vehicle that's going to play particularly well. The M60A2 is a little bit better off, not so much in the protection, because it is very similar. The hull is the exact same. The turret is different, and it will allow you to bounce some shells, but that's not going to give you a whole lot of advantage. Mainly, you have an ATGM and a high explosive anti-tank round with this thing. I typically use the anti-tank guided missile when I'm using this, and the round is good, but again, there's a bunch of tanks here that have AP FSDS that's just going to move a lot faster at you than the ATGM that you're using to shoot back at them with. And of course, because everything's all cramped in here, one shot could easily destroy your entire tank. Now that means the vehicle itself isn't that bad, more so it just makes it really difficult with what you're going up against. The Bradley is somewhat similar, where it's an okay infantry fighting vehicle on its own, but with what you're going up against, it's not going to be easy. Of course, everything can penetrate you, and because you have light armor, it's likely that anything high explosive anti-tank, or any ATGM would likely one-shot you. Plus, you got this whole row of ammunition just right here, and this whole little wall of it in the back. From the front, though, you have some survivability if it hits the lower part of the engine, if they don't know where to aim. Besides that, you do have to stop for the ATGMs to be ready to fire, which some vehicles don't have that need. The M247 is a decent anti-air. It doesn't have the high explosive variable time fuse shells, I believe. As far as I can remember, those are in later platoons. So it's not great. However, the whole armor is the same from the M60 series. So that's decently strong, but your actual turret itself is pretty vulnerable. And one shot there could easily hit your ammunition racks right in the turret, and that will kill you instantaneously. Overall, this platoon is not easy to play well, and for that I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. In the hands of a good player who knows what they're doing, they can play it extremely well, but to newer players, it's kind of cruel that they have to grind this platoon. Next up, the Leopard A1A1. This, of course, being a Leopard, you don't have a large amount of armor, so that's not something you're going to be relying on, but Leopards do have a pretty high speed at 72 kilometers an hour in the forward. Of course, because it is a Leopard and it is the earlier Leopard, you have a lot of ammo in the hull, so that's an easy one shot by anybody. But if you are using the Leopard's mobility correctly, you can position yourself to make that difficult to hit by going to better spots on the map. And of course, the Leopard in this platoon has access to AP FSDS, allowing it to easily deal with the rest of the tanks at this rank. So long as you're aiming properly, nothing should really be too much of an issue. The M48 is a little bit slower and a little bit more sluggish, that of course just being because it is an M48, but you do have access to AP FSDS unlike the M60s, so you have a better chance at survival here, though it is not by much. Of course, you have the same hull issue with ammunition here, making your right side vulnerable, same as the M60s, but if you position well, you should be able to get some kills. And of course, there's the little ammunition rack in the turret itself that you should be aware of. The Rack Jagdpanzer is pretty good in a hold down position. The armor is going to defend you against some machine guns from the sides, potentially, but against higher caliber weapons it will not. If you are in a good hold down position, you can easily get multiple kills just by having only your barrel above where you're trying to fire, and there are certainly good ways to do that. However, if you're hit from the front because you're out in the open, there's ammunition all right back here behind the driver and commander, and of course if they take out the gunner or the loader, you're in a decent more. And of course if they take out the gunner or the loader, and of course if they shoot to the left side, they can take out the gunner and the loader. The loader isn't as important, but the gunner certainly is, so I'd recommend trying to hide as much of the tank as possible while still keeping the gun in line of sight to fire at people. And it does have extremely good mobility with 77 kilometers an hour forward and in reverse. The Gepard is a very good anti-air vehicle. It's pretty light on armor, but if they shoot at the turret in the very center, there's a chance that it goes right through, though it could kill both your commander and gunner, which is not a good situation to be in. From the side, the ammunition rack takes up a whole lot of space, so it's really hard to get hidden and not get kills. For this tank, you're going to want to be very careful if you plan on rushing, but if you just plan to play as an anti-air only, you should be able to do pretty well. You can hold up to some machine guns, but there's a chance that some tanks like the AMX-30 could get through your armor with just their higher powered machine guns. Overall, I'm going to give this platoon a 9 out of 10. It is really good for its rank. The T-55A is an interesting platoon, mainly because the armor is good for the most part. There are some parts that, they throw on top of the standard armor, so, you kind of got a little bit of a layer. The armor on the inside isn't bad either, with this fuel tank that houses the ammunition as well as the fuel tank in front of it, so you have an extra bit of protection. The bad thing here is that the caliber that you have is only 100 millimeters, and the APFSDS that you're firing isn't as powerful as the Leopards. It's not going to be easily killing everything. Plus, with how it's spaced out, if someone shoots you through the turret, which is somewhat possible depending on the angle, they could easily wipe out your gunner, then your commander, then get an ammo kill from there, which is not good. Plus, the ammunition is kind of just stored all around the turret, mostly in the back. So any shots from the side here where you're not paying attention could hit your ammo there and there, which those areas are about 160 and 223 millimeters of armor, or the effective armor, which could easily be penetrated by an APFSDS round. And you do have a 7.5 second reload, which is longer than the Leopards. Plus, the mobility isn't as good. The T-62 has a little bit slower mobility, but you do have a much larger caliber cannon, larger than the Leopards even. You have a similar layout on the inside as the T-55, with the fuel tanks covering up the ammo for the most part on the left side of the front, and you do have ammunition stored in the middle of the back, opening some space up for chances that it goes right through the side of your tank without damaging anything, but of course that's not super likely to happen. And of course there's the chance that if they shoot right about here, they could kill your gunner, driver, as well as your commander all at once, which would pretty much mostly knock out your vehicle. You'd either have to heal a crew member, or at that point you'd be killed. The IT-1 is very interesting. It's not a super fun tank to go up against, considering that the hull armor here, if that's mostly hidden, with just the ATGM sticking out. The IT-1 isn't super fun to face, considering that it has pretty solid armor on the front, especially on the turret at the sides, and you have the ability to mostly just stick only the gun out to fire the ATGMs over cover. However, if a shell does go through, you do have this kind of wall of the anti-tank guided missiles kind of just all lined up, which would easily allow you to be destroyed. And on the other side, you have the driver and commander, which wouldn't knock you out, and you'd still be able to fire your gun. But if they shot so that it nailed your turret ring, you're in a pretty dire situation, as well as if they get your engine. However, the IT-1, as far as I can remember, can still fire on the move, so if you do have a good ability to position yourself, the ATGM should do the rest of the work for you. The ZSU-37 is not the best anti-air, seeing as it only has 2 cannons, but it does have a very rapid reload, though I don't think it has anything like HEVT shells or something like that, so you do have to very carefully aim when you're firing. But, that's been normal for the last very multiple of the anti-airs that have been used. Overall, this platoon isn't the most fun to play, especially when your APFSDS doesn't work how it should, but there are some aspects to it that do make it better than the others, so I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Next up, the ZTZ-88A. This platoon is pretty decent in its main battle tank's armor. You do have some solid armor. At the front, you have this layer over your actual armor, which is about 100 millimeters thick, and it has a pretty steep slope to it, plus the armor on top, allowing you to potentially bounce some shells at higher angles. And of course, you do have composite armor on the inside, which does help you as well. It does have the same issue with the T-55 about how the ammo is kind of placed in the back of the turret, which isn't ideal. It does also have the issue where there's ammo that is somewhat randomly placed, but there is the block of it in the fuel cell at the front. So if a shot does go through, perhaps through the lower frontal plate, there's a chance that that could easily kill your tank. It does have a 7.5 second reload, though it does have access to some pretty solid rounds. The ZTZ-95D1 also has the same fuel cell then ammunition thing, but it has more ammunition scattered about around the tank. Fortunately, though, you do have this structural steel armor around the turret of your tank, so you'll be more protected against high explosive anti-tank rounds. That includes ATGMs, and of course the ERA, which will protect against that as well. Some of it is on your hull, but not a lot. There are sides that doesn't cover, so someone could kill your driver. You do have a 7.5 second reload and a 400 millimeter starting round, which I do believe is the heat round, which later comes with APFSDS. Then you have the CM-25, which I believe, if I can remember correctly, comes with a TOW-2B missile, allowing you to kill enemies without having to look directly at them if you can fire over their cover, depending on how tall the cover is. Of course, this itself doesn't have much armor, but you have somewhat decent mobility to get into position. With a tank like this, it's a little bit more difficult to just have your gunner sticking out, especially when the gunner is out in the open, which you can see here. He is going to be standing up there while firing, so if someone knocks him out, then, it's not easy to continue. And of course, the engine being all up in the front, it allows it to soak up some damage depending on where you're shot, but considering people are going to be using APFSDS, it does open the possibility that your ammunition right here could be easily hit, which isn't really good. But the crew is somewhat spaced out, so it's not completely likely you could die in a one-shot, but there's a chance someone pulls off by hitting something right here. It could hit your gunner, driver, machine gunner, and loader, which would not be ideal, leaving you with just one crew member, I think. This guy in the middle being the commander. Next up, the anti-air vehicle. This one is decent. It has exterior fuel tanks, which could catch fire if hit. But besides that, there's a lot of open space under here for you to be hit and not destroyed. From the front, you have decent armor that could potentially withstand some machine guns with the extra tracks on top, and the angled armor does help, though your main armor will not be protecting you from much. Fortunately, the majority of the ammunition isn't stored directly in the turret, so you could have a gunner or commander knocked out, but you could still have it be mostly operational. For the most part, this anti-air isn't really bad at all, but it will hopefully be better when the radars are fully implemented. This platoon is pretty solid. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. The STRV-103C and I have a love-hate relationship, which I've seen through the past many battles. The armor itself for this tank is pretty solid. It does have this fencing that'll help protect you against anti-tank guided missiles, which are pretty present at this battle rating, though it won't help you so much against TOW-2B missiles. And of course you have the engine here and the transmission, which are taking up a lot of space, and that allows you to have a lot more effective armor, because if an APFSDS round does get through, it's not going to likely get through that. However, there is of course the issue that they could go through your lower hull, which of course there is a extra structure here to help prevent that, but the hull armor there, once you actually get through the side, isn't very much. So a shot through the lower hull could easily get down into your ammunition if fired correctly, or sometimes they'll just explode your fuel, which I'm not exactly sure if it's modeled correctly, but it's somewhere down there, like right, that could be it, right there, and hitting that just instantly kills you, which isn't great. But you do have external fuel tanks for a reason. Anyway, any hit to the back of this tank is devastating, because that's where all the ammunition is, and that's also why it is shaped like this. However, this tank does have the ability to move, reload, fire, and can be completely controlled by one crew member, so you don't need multiple. There are very few tanks that are like that, and the STRV-103 is the only one, as far as I'm aware, that can. Because of that, and combined with the 4-second reload and the APFSDS that you can fire, this tank is pretty powerful, and it is very survivable in most situations. The STRV-104, not so much. The armor itself is not that strong, especially in comparison with the tanks that you're going up against and considering what they're firing. However, you do have some ERA to deal with the more advanced rounds that they may be using if they are heat rounds. Although an APFSDS round doesn't really care about the ERA and will go right through. On the inside, there's a lot of ammunition on the bottom, and you do have a 6.7 second reload. So that's going to be a pretty long reload for having a very low amount of armor. You do have a crew of 4, and you do start out with a decent round, but of course this thing does fire APFSDS as it probably should. And your crew is spaced out decently, though so is the ammunition, so you're not going to be surviving for very long if you are out in the open. So I wouldn't suggest going out in the open, which maybe the STRV can handle, but the STRV-104 cannot. The 103 can, though. The PVR-BV is a very interesting vehicle, considering it also has a crew member in the top to fire. It's also kind of shaped like a bus, somewhat. You do have smoke on this vehicle that you can use to deploy against the enemy, though the armor on the side is not going to be standing up to pretty much any of the machine guns that you're going to be facing. The armor in the front can take it, though. You're going to have to play this thing pretty carefully. I don't remember if it has TOW-2B missiles or not, though if it does, that'll be a large help. The VEEK-40 is decent anti-air. If played well, you can actually use it to kill many enemies by just running through the map and flanking, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. That's not exactly what it was designed for, but I've seen a lot of players do it, so I trust that it is pretty likely to be done if you guys want to. Of course, there's a lot of ammunition in the turret, which is pretty present throughout the whole thing, so if you have your turret turned, there's a pretty high chance that someone could pen through that and destroy it. The driver, gunner, and commander are all sitting inside of the turret, so if anyone shoots at your hull, you should be able to survive. It might set something on fire. You might not be able to move, but at least you'll be able to fully control the rest of your tank for the most part. Overall, this platoon is pretty fun to play. I don't think I've played it in a hot minute, but if I do, I'll give it a 8 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it is very fun, and it works pretty well. The STB2 is a very complicated machine as well for me. The STB2 does not have APFSDS, which is kind of a need for the battle rating that it's at. It has somewhat effective armor, though of course because of what you're facing, it's not going to be a whole lot of a help. At higher angles, your turret could easily bounce some of the rounds, though of course if they're actually shooting towards the center, it's going to go through. You have this massive issue with all the ammo on the left side, and of course you have ammunition on the right side as well as the back of the turret. So it's kind of just everywhere. If they shoot you frontally, there's a pretty high chance that they're going to hit a ammunition storage somewhere. And of course, if they don't, they could hit the gunner and the commander, which you don't want that to happen either. So very vulnerable from the front, not great. Then again, the MBTs don't typically have a whole lot of armor, because that's not necessarily what they're designed for. The STB2 is pretty good in its mobility. It has a somewhat long reload of 6.7 seconds, though the ammunition that it carries will allow you to destroy targets. The Type 74C is a pretty similar story to the STB2, especially with how the ammunition is laid out on the inside of the tank, and they do have some pretty similar values for their speed and everything else, so I'm not going to get too much further into that and we can move on. The Type 87 RCV is a very interesting armored personnel carrier. This lower plate armor will protect you against some enemies, whereas the upper plate armor is pretty similar with the angle that it's at, allowing you to bounce pretty much the same rounds that wouldn't be able to go through the bottom. Through the X-ray view, we can see that everything is at the front, and if they fire through the sides, there are some gaps that the shells could go through, though there's not a whole lot. There is a loader back here, which is facing away from the combat, which is pretty interesting. Though that does mean that you could get shot, and that could get the machine gunner the gunner and the loader all at once, which isn't ideal because you would be left with the driver and commander. Though the commander can fire, that's not going to be a good situation to be in, and if they hit on the opposite side, there's a chance they hit the ammunition rack. This light vehicle is pretty difficult to play unless you're flanking really hard, because any shots, unless they're APFSDS through the sides in the lucky areas, are likely to get you killed. So you're going to want to be very careful with it, and I wouldn't take that lightly, though you do have some pretty high mobility, allowing you to get around the map very quickly. The Type 87 is an interesting anti-air vehicle as well. The frontal armor right here isn't as good, but the angled armor is pretty solid. So if you can hide the lower part of your hull, you're in a better situation than you already would be. Of course, then there's the issue with your whole actual armor of your turret not being really existent, and if they get through, they could easily get your commander or your gunner. And of course, firing through the hull allows them to easily get all of that ammunition because of that interesting layout that they have to have for it. It is a somewhat vulnerable vehicle. I wouldn't recommend using it in open spaces, but of course, if you want to rush the enemy with it because you just like doing that type of thing, go for it. This platoon isn't quite as bad as the M60 in my opinion, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. The OF-40 Mark IIA is one of the better platoons for this rank. You do have some spaced armor, which is definitely helpful, and the frontal armor on your main tank isn't that bad for an MBT either. You do have the access to some pretty good rounds, and your mobility is extremely good for the OF-40 Mark II. Your reload is 6.7 seconds, as is fairly normal for this rank, though of course in higher ranks that is shortened. And it does have a pretty good power to weight ratio, allowing you to easily zoom around the map. However, the ammunition layout, if you are going to be hit, is pretty atrocious, with a very large area for you to be hit, with all of your right side for the hull being extremely dangerous, and especially if someone's firing at you from any angle where your right side is exposed, is likely to be a one-shot. So you're going to have to be very light on your feet with this one. The Leopard is a pretty similar story, and you are able to access very good choices of ammunition as well. We've already covered a Leopard before, but this one is slightly different. Of course, the gun is pretty much the exact same. The handling of it should be pretty similar, so we don't have to talk too much more on it. The M113A1 has access to TOW-2B missiles, I believe. If not, you guys can correct me in the comments. Very light vehicle. It's a very light vehicle. I believe we touched on a vehicle that is very similar considering the layout of the hull. So we can continue. The Saddam 25 from the front. Its armor is likely to be penned by most machine guns as well as the sides for the most part. But the turret is actually pretty unmanned if they hit the upper portion of it. And you have the ammunition down here. So if the top half of your turret is sticking out, if you can find a nice spot on perhaps Normandy, and you choose to fire at someone, that could be a light tank, there's a chance that you don't get killed, but if they're using a ATGM or something like that, there's not much of a chance that you survive. But as an anti-air, this one is pretty enjoyable with its 4 sets of 25mm cannons. This platoon is really fun to play, and it really works well for rank 8, so I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Next up, the Magach 6R. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you guys are going to have to live with how I pronounce it. The hull armor is the same for the M60, I believe, but it just has ERA slapped on top of it. Also, this structural steel kind of wedge that's out in front, that does offer an extra little bit of protection, though not by much. The inside of the tank is pretty atrocious, with the frontal armor being, not much to hide all of the ammunition that's just everywhere. Though the turret is somewhat spaced out, so if someone shoots down the exact middle, right past your gun mantlet, there's a chance that it doesn't damage much crew on the inside, though you do have some ammunition in the turret itself, which at this point isn't really great. Though the ERA certainly helps you be a lot more survivable, you do have a 6.7 second reload and APFSDS rounds, so you kind of have to play it a little bit more like the Leopards, though you don't have that high of a mobility, so it's kind of a 50-50 with how well you do. The Magach 6B has more ERA on the side of the turret that goes further back, though you do have a large ammunition storage in your turret. Now, I believe this is, as it states, the first stage storage, so that's where all of your main ammunition is going to be if you have less than 37 rounds. So you shouldn't have to worry about too much of it being in your hull then, though there are some spots here in your hull that it will have to be, I assume. Overall, the layout is pretty much the exact same except for the fact that you have additional ERA here, and besides that, it's not too much different from the Magach 6R. The Schott Kai Gimel, which I probably butchered the pronunciation of that terribly, has a pretty large fuel tank that has the ammunition of it in the front as well, similar to the T55 and T60s. Because of that, if that is hit, you are going to have a lot of issues. And of course, if they hit the other side, they hit your driver, potentially some ammunition in the back. So, not a tank that you want to be very out in the open with, though of course that's pretty much the same for most of the tanks at this rank. You do have a 105mm cannon with a 6.7 second reload, which is pretty standard for this rank now that I'm realizing it. Next up is the Hovet. This is a pretty decent anti-air vehicle. It's based on the M163, I believe, or it might exactly be an M163 by a different name. The armor in the front isn't great. It will withstand against some machine guns, and of course there is this aluminum alloy which may protect you against low caliber high explosive anti-tank rounds if you go up against a mouse, potentially. And of course, with the 0-second reload that it states it has, and the very high turret turn rate, you should easily be able to shred anti-air vehicles, and potentially some ground targets as well if you have to. This platoon isn't particularly bad, though it is not the best in my opinion, so for that reason I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. The AMX-30B2B is potentially the best platoon for you to buy at rank 8. Now that may be a controversial opinion, but you guys came here to watch my video, so I'm going to have at it. You do have ERA, which is definitely going to be effective against, the targets that we're facing with ATGMs and high explosive anti-tank rounds. And you have a little extra cannon here that is a 20mm that has pretty decent penetration and a very high reload rate. You do have ammunition in the hull, which isn't ideal, plus it sticks out in the turret as well. Though that is your first stage stowage, so it's not all going to be down in the front here, which is going to be a pretty good help to you. Plus, here you have a APS, and that APS does certainly help against ATGMs. The typical targets that are going to fire at you, half the targets that you are facing that are firing ATGMs will probably get past this APS, but if they do, you do have the ERA for that exact reason, and if they can't, the APS will protect you by a large measure to get that out of the way so that the ATGM does not hit your tank. However, I have to state that it does indeed have a limit. You have to be looking exactly at where the ATGM is for it to be deflected. Even with that being so, this tank is just really overpowered, especially with the ability to do 72 kilometers an hour in reverse. That is pretty high mobility for a main battle tank. The AMX-32 is pretty similar in the most part, except that you don't have the APS or the ERA. Besides that, though, you do have a more neat ammo stowage in the back, and you also do have hull ammo storage as well, though that's not as well covered. You do have access to both high explosive anti-tank and APFSDS rounds, of course. The Mars 15 also has that as well with a 5-second reload, which is pretty good for APFSDS, though it's not going to be as high penetrating because you only have a 90mm main cannon. And of course it has a little bit of an autoloader with how these shells are set up here, so that's going to help, but of course if you run out of those rounds then your reload's going to be a decent little bit longer. The frontal protection on this vehicle is pretty good. The AMX-32, which just to go back briefly, not so much the same, but the Mars 15, for what it is, being a light tank, it can definitely withstand most machine guns except maybe the 20mm that the AMX-20s also have. But I do believe it can withstand 50 cals, and not maybe from the side, but certainly from the front. Especially with how the inside is laid out, it will probably damage your engine if it does get through, but it is unlikely to damage crew directly. If it does get through, though, you are pretty vulnerable on the backside. You do not want to be flanked while using this thing. It's not going to be a good time if you do, though there is a very small chance that it could go right through back into hitting your engine if they hit dead center. The AMX-30S DCA, I believe we've talked about this before. Pretty good reload for what it is. It has really high mobility, which is great. The fuel tank does cover up a ammunition storage area, and the hull armor is pretty good for an anti-air. It allows you to, so long as you're not showing too much of your turret, easily destroy lighter vehicles and potentially main battle tanks with its somewhat limited penetration power, though it will allow you to shred their guns if you have to. This platoon, based purely on the fact that its starting vehicle is so extremely strong and will easily allow you to level itself up, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. In the next video, since we're going to be going over the platoons that are paid for or from events, I'm going to be a little bit less gracious on how I grade them considering what some of them can do. But based on the fact that this one is free and it has these capabilities, it is really definitely highly, all these other adjectives, worth it. I highly recommend, above all else, that you get this rank 8 platoon. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. It's a little bit of a longer one, and it's going to take me forever to edit. If you have liked this video, please subscribe, and I will see you guys again in the next one.